You are listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. I'm Elena Paweta, Executive Communication Coach and TEDx organizer. With each episode, I'll share with you communication tips and ideas from top business leaders to help you excel in your career. Hello, welcome to the next episode of Ideas and Leaders podcast. And today, my guest is Don Schmincke. He's the author of a best-selling book, The Code of Executive. He has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today. He's an award-winning speaker, researcher, founder of SAGA Leadership Institute, and he delivered over 1,700 speeches. I'm so looking forward to our conversation about leadership. Hi, Don. It's great to have you here.
Hi, how are you? I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Don, what is your story? How did you get to where you are right now?
Oh boy, I almost dropped out of high school, and until I was told I might have to repeat my senior year, and then I thought, well, how many days do I have? They said, you got 90 days left, so I went in, did my whole senior year in 90 days, and I was in rock and roll bands trying to make a living, and I ended up in a community college, and I got fascinated by learning stuff, and nobody cared if I showed up or not because I'd already paid for it. So I did that. I got a couple of associate degrees, and then there were a couple of people that had come from Cambridge, and they recommended I apply to MIT, and I thought, I don't know what that was, or I thought, is that a trade school? I had no idea. But one was a physics professor. He had retired, and he was having fun just teaching at the local college there. So I applied and did a lot of testing, and they let me in. And that sort of changed everything. And I got really excited about learning, mainly in the sciences and engineering. So I spent some time with in the early stages of computer science and electrical engineering, AI, things like that, and automated the Harvard MIT Biomedical Lab. Ended up doing a joint degree with planetary physics, and worked in the Trident nuclear missile guidance system research to help pay my tuition. And that's where I got started. And then I got fascinated by humans and how they work, because I was getting into biological measurement systems, and ended up at Johns Hopkins. Did my graduate work there, ended up teaching there, and I ran into a bunch of executives and entrepreneurs that were complaining about management theory failure rates. And so I put together, I started networking with some anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists and geneticists, and we began to look at the problem. And then I started publishing, and books went into a dozen languages. Next thing you know, I'm on CNN, and I'm like, is this important? So now I train about 700 CEOs a year, and I'm having fun teaching this new research.
Great. That's a very interesting story. So, Don, then you have written a book, The Code of Executive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very interested actually in it because there are so many leadership books out there. When you go and you see that there's a variety of leadership books. So what do you think is missing? Why did you decide to write this book? What is missing in the leadership theory, in your opinion?
A lot of them don't work. That's what I was told. These CEOs were investing tons of time and money training their leaders, but they were still struggling with dysfunctional behaviors, politics, gossip, blaming, silos, turf battles. I can go on and on, but I was curious as to why they kept dumping all this money into all this these books and courses, and and I found out that it wasn't unique to just the CEOs. When I went on Google Scholar and started looking at, management theory failure rates, I was getting millions of hits. So that's when I decided to look at this differently. And so I thought the gap was there was nothing wrong with the theories. They all were great. They all were relevant. They all made sense. So why were we having these problems that were so chronic? And that's when I began to get into this research from a scientific point of view. And then we started applying what we learned, and we started seeing a dramatic acceleration in leadership performance and sales and culture and these things they were trying to get done. So there wasn't really a gap. I think there were a lot of great ideas around leadership. I think the implementation is where the failure rates were. They weren't altering behavior in that sense. You know what I mean? It's like I go into somebody's office and they're poorly performing on the job, and on their shelves they have all the top best-selling leadership books. I'm like, well, why am I here, and why are you not able to perform? And so I decided part of the anthropology was to go back, and I started looking at these ancient documents, and I found out that they had figured stuff out that we don't teach. And so that my first book was based on Oxford University, gave me permission to use this ancient manuscript. And then I wrote a couple books after that. But a lot of the research was either on ancient work or testing humans in extreme environments. Like when I wrote High Altitude Leadership with Chris Warner, who's one of the top rescue climbers, we were looking at putting humans in death zone environments, above 8,000 meters and see what they do. And so we filmed a lot of this work. It was supported by NBC because they were filming Chris on a mountaineering expedition. I'd finished climbing with Chris in the Andes, and I had this great idea, right? So the K2 NBC special was really a video of many weeks of filming for that book. So testing humans in death zones and even visiting lost civilizations in the Himalayas gave me an idea for biological trends and issues and just what's happening inside of us that cause us to lead the way we do. And so that, with like the ancient samurai, was a really rich foundation to understand. And since I was at Johns Hopkins, I had access to the medical school and a lot of the research there, to do something fresh and something different around leadership development.
Wow, that is so interesting, the way you conducted your research. So what did you find out when you did this research? What did you find out? What is missing? What they knew and they know what we don't know?
Right, right. It was it became really obvious. The anthropologists, as we were digging into this, we went to look at, you know, what are we doing, and how are we trying to teach leaders, and why is behavior not changing? Because, and it looked like we had a lot of tools, a lot of leadership tools. What do I got to do to be a good leader, and how do I do it? And all these books talked about that. Here's what you do. Here's how you do it. We started looking at, later on, more recently in our research, a lot of great TEDx talks as an example. Here's what you do. Here's how you do it. And but still, when you look at the audience members and when they go back to their office, you're not seeing these dramatic breakthroughs. So something was stopping human decision from shifting, human behavior from shifting. And it turned out that from the anthropological perspective, it was beliefs, but their beliefs weren't changing. They had a lot of tools, but one CEO said to me, he says, a fool with the tool is still a fool. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And so we had to find out what alters human decision, because the tools are great. There's nothing wrong with them. But what alters the decision of humans? And it turned out that the one thing that we're not teaching is how to shift the beliefs of humans. So we went back to look at CEOs like Alexander the Great or Cleopatra, Gandhi, Hannibal, Caesar, Genghis Khan. We began to see that these CEOs, some of these CEOs dominated the world in their lifetime. That's a good market penetration event, I think, to dominate your market in your lifetime. And it appeared that what they were doing is they kind of figured out how to alter the beliefs of their humans. And that's what we found was missing. And so our research at that point shifted entirely to how to alter human beliefs. And then we were able to go back to all the leadership elements around, how do we invent strategy? How do we align followers behind us? How do we change culture and structure and execution? And we ended up looking at all those tools and coming up with new ways of altering the beliefs so those tools could execute. So it was fascinating research. It took a long time. We had to do a lot of studies, and but it worked out. So that's what I teach today, and work with companies um, to always hone it. We're always learning new stuff. So it's not over. We have a lot more to learn, but it's working, and we're having fun with it.
It is so interesting. Uh, so you told about the samurai principles, and it is really interesting for me to see what is how can samurai principles relate to leaders and to leadership success. What can we learn from them?
Death. When I got this manuscript, the first chapter was on death, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't going to go well." But it was interesting how death was their first lesson, and it wasn't really the physical death. The samurai are famous for their ritual suicides, but it was the death of the ego, basically. And uh, when they started teaching that every samurai executive must keep in mind constantly by day and night the fact that they must die someday, somehow that unhooked the selfish, egotistical components that cause dysfunctional behaviors and free the samurai to operate with integrity and bravery and honor. And I thought that was fascinating, but I wasn't sure why it worked. So this is where at Johns Hopkins, I was able to access, a lot of brilliant brain surgeons and researchers, and it turns out that what I concluded is that selfishness is the best strategy for committing genetic warfare, and that's why it's inside of us. And you commit genetic warfare by replicating the data in our bodies. And that replication is how animals compete to win genetic war. That's why all animals are selfish. But here today, it gets in the way, right? Because here we're humans and we're selfish. But the selfishness tends to produce fear-based, reactive uh, behaviors like politics and all those things that suck speed out of our companies. And speed's important. My friend George Stalk wrote a number of articles and wrote the book on time-based competition, competing against time, 20 years ago, and it was revolutionary. And I spent a couple hours a week with George sharing ideas, but speed is important, and selfishness gets in the way. So the samurai death thing gave a way to release that, and so we started teaching executive teams and entrepreneurs and managers how to die properly. And that was interesting. So, I during COVID, I was locked in my house, and I did a studio, and I started learning how to film this so I could get out there even more. So we started this course called Becoming Samurai, and it talks about that flow. So how it basically works is, we find out what are our fears that are holding us back, and what are we attached to causing those fears, and how to die, how to let go of it to free us. And it seems to work today just like it worked well with the samurai. And so I would say that would be the key area of leadership success, is to get yourself out of the way, get your ego out of the way so you can operate with bravery and honor, because people will follow that, and if you're being selfish, people are going to find out. They see it immediately. You think you're cool enough? Nah, you're not that good. They know.
It is really great that we need to get ourselves out of the way, as simple as this. And so what would you recommend to our listeners who want to enhance their leadership skills? Maybe a couple of tips from your books or from your trainings. What can we do on top of those leadership theories that we know? What can we do to actually enhance our leadership skills, our personal leadership, and our careers?
I think it's a matter of understanding what leadership really is first, and operate from that foundation, which is, I think John Kotter said it best in his work at Harvard. He said, managers are there to create and maintain order, but leaders are there to destroy the order the managers created. So leadership is about change. And if there's nothing to change, there's nothing to lead. Just manage what you got. But if there is change, that's a great context, because change means death, if you think about it. Because change means the death of something that's already there, that must change to get to the next level. So enhancing personal leadership or career, as I think, start with the result in mind. Start with, what is it that you want to achieve? What is it that you want to change in your life? And if it's in career, then great. What is your manager or your CEO looking for in terms of the results you need to produce? And in your life, what do you want to produce 3, 5, 10 years out? And then from those results, look at, what could be stopping you, holding you back? What fears? What are you attached to? And can you let those die? Get that, and apply the death thing to let those things die that are holding you back, so that you can move forward with more speed. And I think people that are able to do that tend to achieve more than just staying stuck. Does that make sense?
Yeah. This is really important to have those long-term goals. And so how can we, if we figure out what is stopping us, is there anything we can do to actually overcome those fears or barriers?
Yeah, and I come back to that first sentence in that ancient manuscript is, remember that someday you must die, and see what you can let go of in that context. And it was interesting, as a lot of the work, my colleague Cameron Lugman helped Apple start their creation research after Steve Jobs died. And I remember hearing that Steve Jobs, when he made a decision, often referenced, if I have to die tomorrow, what decision do I really want to make today? So if we go through history and we look at great leaders, it's a common perspective. And I think for leaders today, if they could do that, I think that would be a big help, because you can't stay stuck in life. It's too short. There's only so much runway you have. So, use the best of it, because someday you're going to look back and think, oh my God, it's almost over. And what did I do to make the world a better place? What did I do to help people grow? What changes did I make that were positive? And a lot of that has to come from in you.
Wow, that is so inspiring. I'm sure that you're inspiring a lot of our listeners. And the last question that I wanted to ask you, Don, today is about the current situation and this year 2021 is different, and the previous year, this time is very much different from everything that we read in the leadership and management books. And we have to somehow change our strategy. So what would you recommend to the leaders and managers and entrepreneurs who are listening to us? What can they do or differently to adapt to this situation?
Reset everything. Totally reset your strategy. A couple of things that, because we do a lot of strategic planning for companies, and we find out that one of the things missing is a lot of us have never done strategy. I mean, we have these strategic plans, we have these strategic planning events, but when we look at the output, it's all tactics. So one of the problems I think we've done, and I was part of the problem myself because I was teaching strategy like tactics, like an analytical approach, and strategy has really been intuition. That's how come these small companies start up, and in their lifetime, just like Alexander or Caesar or Genghis Khan, they dominate their markets, they dominate the world in their lifetime. And what they're doing is they're violating expert opinion. They're violating the thought leaders. They're violating the best practices. And how do these companies violate all that and end up winning? And it was because of intuition. They're outmaneuvering the enemy. So I think step back, reset, ask yourself, do I really have strategy or do I just have tactics? And in this new world, take a look at what changed. The great article on disruption by George Stalk, I would download that, because what George did recently is he published this article that talked about the OODA loop, which was a U.S. jet fighter technique where they could go up against a superior aircraft. This happened during the Korean War. The U.S. jets were totally inferior to the Russian MiGs. And somehow some pilots had a 10-to-1 kill ratio. And how can you have a 10-to-1 kill ratio with an inferior product? And this OODA loop came out, and just very simply, it's observe, orient, decide, and act. And this loop was happening in their brains. And that's what we have to do now as strategists, as leaders, is to say, observe now the world differently. Get all the data you can, but that second piece, orient yourself. What does it mean? What has changed? And this is more of a creative effort than an analytical effort, to be able to say, what does this mean? And then from that, look at your hypothetical decision possibilities of what you could do, and then just act on it. And so I think that is where we need to take strategy, to be able to adapt. And the companies that will do that faster will win. And the rest, George just brought this up last week when I was talking to him. He said, a lot of companies use their legacy techniques, their legacy methods, their legacy tools to respond to competition. And that's why they end up losing. Because it's not about, your legacy tools aren't going to work anymore. If you're being disrupted in your industry, or you want to cause disruption in your industry, you have to give up on your legacy tools, because it's going to be a new world out there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Don, for your insights. And it is, I'm really interested to read your book, and I really recommend to our listeners to find your book, The Code of Executive, and to get to know more about those theories. So if our listeners want to find you, how can they contact you?
Sure. I have on the website, SAGALeadership.com. We stole that from the Vikings, SAGA, S as in Sam, AGA, leadership.com. If you /podcast, there's a lot of download material that you can get for some of the research we've done. If you want to email me, I do have an email address. You can just, I love talking to the community. You can write to Don at SAGA Leadership. That's DON, my first name, at SAGALeadership.com. And again, we're doing more and more research, so love to have you part of our community as we go forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Don.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. Did you enjoy this episode? Let me know that you listened by tagging me in your LinkedIn profile and using a hashtag Ideas and Leaders. See you in the next episode.